I was here before you, bro.
I'll bring it in here.
Huh? Yeah. Did you know that? You were. Nice to meet you. No, it's alright. Went to bed at 6 days. So I was at it too, because I was doing my chemistry test. Yeah, bro. So I'm like, a lot of reasons. Mostly business. Yeah. Oh wait, you told me. I think my brain interpreted something like, well, you just popped in or something like that. Oh. That was like what having sense.
That's honestly not good.
But that makes more sense than like not assuming you got it. What did you assume that I got? Okay.
But I was just confused because I was like, your answer was not the answer my question. So
That's okay.
it's fine. You know what? We're you know what, we're here. And that's all that matters.
We got there. I know you have a pop tart. What kind of pop tart did you get?
I don't know, whatever.
Wait, that's a cherry.
But that way about 4
That's why I was totally just like, not that. Catching up because apparently it won't. I have no idea.
I don't know if you did this, but
All right, let's go ahead and get moving, class. I'm glad to be able to teach again. I know Cooper did a good job the past couple of weeks. I wasn't here for last week, but I watched it online. And so let's go ahead and jump into this with 1 Corinthians 11. So go ahead and have your Bibles open. Today's study is going to be very interesting. So I hope that your thinking caps are on. Now let me ask, as we start, we just finished this section from 1 Corinthians chapters 8 through 10. What was the main topic? We'll see how many people were listening to Cooper. What was the main topic that Paul addressed in chapters 8 through 10? Nobody listened to Cooper. Oh, man. Starts with M and ends with eat. Meat. Meat offered to idols. So, man, I'll get you another time, Cooper. So, chapters 8 through 10, remember we had this whole problem, eat meat offered to idols, you had this liberty, but use it for the building up of the church. Hey, don't eat the meat. And so then, chapter 11, verse 1 is where Cooper kind of like, he took chapter 11, verse 1 and stopped there, where Paul says, imitate Paul, because Paul imitates Christ. And honestly, it's a terrible chapter break, and so it really, anyways, chapter 11, verse 1 really probably should go with the rest of it, which is why Cooper went ahead and covered it, because Paul talks about, like, hey, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that people can hear the gospel. I want people to be saved. I'll do whatever is necessary. Imitate me as I imitate Christ, which kind of makes sense, right? Like Luke 19, verse 10 talks about how Jesus came to this earth to seek and save the lost, and he did all that was necessary for salvation for all. In the same way, Paul is at least trying to imitate Christ. So now, we get this topic changed to something new. He's still addressing some things that were mentioned in the, remember, they had like chapter 7, verse 1, Paul was like, all right, now I'm going to answer some of the stuff that you were asking about. So we know that Corinth kind of sent a letter to Paul, and they had some questions and stuff, and so Paul is addressing some of that. He's still addressing some of that. So in chapter 11, he starts talking about roles of men and women in worship, and we're going to see kind of what that looks like. And then he's going to talk about something else if we get there. So let's start in verse 2, and someone read verses 2 through 5.
Now I commend you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions, even as I delivered them to you. want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of the church is God. The head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. But every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven.
Alright, so starting in verse 2, Paul says that he praises or commends the church for remembering him and also for holding to the traditions that he delivered to them. However, what we're about to see is that they're kind of not actually keeping some of these things that Paul told them. And so Paul, I think, is kind of praising them maybe as like I'm going to say this nice thing, and then I'm about to be really critical. And it's almost like opening the door a little bit so that he can get in there and say what he needs to say. So we're about to see that they're actually struggling with some of the stuff that Paul sent to them. So what Paul's done is apparently, he's given them some traditions, some ways that they can honor God in Corinth, ways that they can show honor to him. And it seems they're following some of these, but maybe not properly, or not in everything, or in all ways, or every way. And so Paul is kind of opening this door for criticism. Well, to be able to kind of criticize them. And of course, in a loving way, it's Paul, but he's going to have to tell them, like, you need to fix some things. And so this seems to be a way that he's about to open up, like, all of chapters 11 through 14, because he's about to hit a number of things that they are struggling with or not doing correctly. And so there's multiple things that this one sentence kind of opens the door to. All right, so let's look at verse 3. This is where he really gets to his topic. It says, I want you to understand that Christ is the head of every man, the man is the head of a woman, and God is the head of Christ. Now, as we start this study, let's go ahead and lay maybe some ground rules. Ground rule number 1 will be that Paul is not going to contradict anything that he's already said. Like in any of his letters, he's not going to contradict it. Okay, so as we read this verse, what are some other places that you might think of that Paul has talked about something along these lines? Are there any other verses that come to mind?
His letter to Timothy.
It's like chapter 2? Yeah, chapter 2. So like in chapter 2, where he talks about like the roles of men and women. And actually he does something similar in this one. It's a little different. But by kind of grounding that in creation, this one's going to be a different way to do that. And we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, so in 1 Timothy chapter 2, he talks about the roles of men and women, and that men are the ones who are leading in worship, and the role of women in that as well. Okay, what else?
Ephesians 1, 22 and 23, Jesus is given his head over all things to the church, which is his body.
Right, and so we get Christ as the head, the top of the position of the body. Like, of course, when we talk about the head of something, it's metaphorical, like, obviously. And so, what is it meaning? And the meaning is always, at least in Ephesians 1, 22, 23, that Jesus is at the top. He is at the top of the structure, okay? There might be another, like even in Ephesians chapter 5. Yeah, is that what you're going to say? Bingo, I knew it. Chapter 5, it's because we're related now. Verses, what is that, like the 25-ish in that ballpark, is that Paul writes about that man is what the head is. Does he say man is the head of woman, or does he say that man is the head? Okay, or the head of his
Head of the church.
No, you can say it.
Husband to wife. And then wife, like Christ the church.
Okay, all right, okay. But y'all know where I'm getting at here. Okay, so chapter 5, verses like 22 through 20, really like into verse 30-ish, where he says that like man is kind of the head of woman, and not exactly in that way, more so husband is kind of the head of his household, as Christ is the head of the church and gave himself up for the church. And that man is supposed to love, or that husband is supposed to love his wife like Christ loved the church and gave himself up. And so Paul's already talked about a number of these kinds of things, none of which is demeaning, but always in the sense of there are roles here. And we're about to see something similar here, is that there are roles. Now, one is, we know that Paul's not going to contradict. He's already, and we see throughout the Bible, we've already seen that women are made in the image of God just as men are, and that both are equal value to God. In the eyes of God, it should be. In the church, they just have different roles. And so when we get here, we need to keep that in mind. This has already been talked about in the Bible. Paul's not going to contradict it here. So let's keep that in mind as we go through here, because there's a couple times where you may think, whoa, what's he saying? And before we get to that point, we need to say, all right, well, we already know this stuff. And so he's not gonna contradict. All right. So he says, Christ is the head of every man. And he's setting up his arguments by showing some rank here. The word head, though I did not know this, but the word head is super argued of like what it means. I didn't even know that. But it seems that the idea is that head is showing like preeminence, is like ranks above another, so to say. And so the word, of course, it literally means like our head, but it's metaphorical. And so it's getting to the idea that in every relationship mentioned, one has priority over another. The head of a group means like you occupy the position at the top or at the front. And so it doesn't make you or one or the other inferior in value, but it does show that whoever is head kind of deserves loyalty. Okay, so Christ is the head of every man. Christ is preeminent to man. Christ is above every man, and man must be loyal to Christ because he's positioned at the head. The man is the head of every woman. Man is preeminent in this case to woman. Man was created first, and woman was made in recognition that man needs more, that it's incomplete. The world that man is incomplete without the creation of woman. Get that in Genesis 2, and we'll go there again a little bit later. Now, does this mean that women are inferior to men? Well, let's see the next phrase. And God is the head of Christ. Okay, so certainly not, right? If Christ even has a head, that can't mean that Christ is inferior, because Christ is God. But God, the Father and the Spirit and the Son, is preeminent in this case to Christ. Meaning, okay, yeah, Christ is all-powerful, and Christ is God himself, but Christ works within God. He is part of the whole. And so the Father doesn't hold all control. The Spirit doesn't hold all control, nor does Christ hold all control. God, in his entirety, works together. Okay, you see what I mean? And so even Christ has a head. So someone, a being who holds higher rank, we'll say. And so the point is that everyone has a head. But Paul's point is about to be, and I took this quote up here from a guy smarter than me, that what one does or doesn't put on one's head, one's physical head, either honors or dishonors one's spiritual head. We're about to talk about head covering, that's where this is coming from, right? And so what you do or don't do with your physical head honors or dishonors your spiritual head. Now we need to keep that in mind because he's going to not really tell us which head he's talking about a few times. And so we'll try to like sift through a little bit. All right, so in verse 4 he says, every man who has something on his head while praying or prophesying disgraces his head. All right, so every man whose physical head is covered while praying, with talking to God or prophesying, which is the edification of the church, those around, dishonors his head, Christ. Verse 3, right? Christ is the head of every man. And so the covering of a head with a physical cloth is what's being referred to. And we know that Paul begins his discussion. This discussion is primarily going to talk about women and head coverings with women, but multiple times he'll start with men and not ground his argument, but start there and then say, but with women, and he'll switch his argument. So that's what he's going to do a couple of times. This one's kind of interesting because it's kind of like implied, maybe not implied, but the audience would absolutely understand. Like, okay, yeah, like men don't cover their heads, we get that. But we don't have a ton of evidence for like what that would have looked like for their culture. Some people say other like idolatrous religions would like cover their heads with togas as they were like worshiping or whatever, but there's not even really a ton of evidence for that. But Corinth would have known, yeah, guys don't do that. We get that part. So that would have been totally disgraceful. We're going to see that word a lot, by the way. Keep that in mind. So we get to verse 5. And really verses 5 and 6 should go together a little bit better, but I didn't put this on the slide. So this whole study is going to help you have your Bible open so we can use context. But every woman who has her head uncovered while praying or prophesying disgraces her head. For she is one and the same as the woman whose head is shaved. So a woman has her head, physical, covered while praying or prophesying, that she disgraces man, her head. And so there are a couple of things that need to be addressed in this text. All this is about head coverings, of course. There are a lot of things we can't know for certain. I've heard a lot of things about this text, and usually is always in like a Q&A at a camp or something, and someone gets up there and spends like 2 or 3 minutes to say, yeah, it's cultural, we don't need to be doing that. And then it sits down, and when I studied this, I realized that left me with a lot of questions because we've never really dug into all this stuff. And the things that were said, like, wow, well, people were wearing head coverings and this, all that kind of stuff, some of that wasn't even true, or at least we don't have a lot of evidence for it. And so it was interesting for me as I was studying through this. We don't know, I think as much as I thought that I knew, about what was going on in Corinth when it comes to head coverings. So we're going to do our best to kind of reconstruct some of the history and cultural stuff that we know, and maybe just try to determine the background of why Paul is saying what he says here. What we know is that, or what we can't know, is we don't really even know if this is in like the whole church is together worshiping and this is happening context, or this is in some kind of public assembly context. We're not even really sure about that. He doesn't really say. And so I thought that was interesting. There are going to be a number of times where I could say, like, you might have heard this, but I don't have time. And so I'm going to try to just kind of build a case for, like, this is what's going on here, about the culture, about Paul's instructions, and then we'll talk about how to apply this or not apply all this stuff. And ideally, how to study passages like this in the future. We'll try to learn some things along the way about that as well. All right, so verses 5 and 6, he's going to make 3 kind of main, we'll say umbrellas for an argument. The first one is an argument from culture. We see that verses 5 and 6. So we need to get in verse 6 to see the rest of this, and then we'll talk about it as a whole. So I'll just read verse 6, and then when we get into the next session, we'll let someone else read. In verse 6, he says, "For if a woman does not cover her head, let her also have her hair cut off. But if it is disgraceful for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaved, let her cover her head." Okay, so verse 6 tells us it's disgraceful for a woman to have her head, her hair cut off. I have in my notes her head cut off, but that would probably be that as well. Let's just fix that real quick. At the end of this, I'm going to give people notes, like to the end of the class, and I want you to go back and like, her head cut off. Anyways, it was disgraceful for a woman to have her hair cut off or shaved. Okay, so what that would do is it just brings shame on the woman, and they would not even consider doing that, these women in the church here. And because this would cause a woman to look more like a man. She loses her hair, and this would be kind of a point to a loss of femininity. I'm going to say that a couple of times today, and every time I'm going to say it slow to make sure I get it right. Femininity. And I think that's part of Paul's point, is that maybe they're blurring some lines between men's and women's roles or distinctions in both their culture and in worship. We're going to see in chapter 14 where he sets more of those boundaries straight that they're breaking here. So Paul says that for a woman to pray or prophesy with an uncovered head is essentially the same as having a head that is shaved. Confusing the role of your gender brings shame to your head. Man, when you don't wear this head covering, you confuse what you're supposed to look like. You're bringing shame to your head. So Paul's instruction is cover your head while you pray or while you prophesy. Now, one thing we need to know is what is the role of head coverings in Corinth? Like, what is this? This is pretty foreign, for the most part, pretty foreign to us, and so at least as it would be for them. And so, what does it mean for them? Well, the general understanding in Corinth, and honestly, kind of even into today, but especially then, is that you are what you wear. Even today, right, we can make some judgments about each other just based on what we wear on a day-to-day basis. This was kind of even more so for them. So head coverings on a woman kind of send a message to the world, hey, I can't be approached. It's almost like a wedding ring. It's like, don't approach me, I'm taken unavailable. And so you're not available for others while you're wearing this head covering. It is generally considered to be something that respectable women wore. So if you found yourself worthy of respect as a woman, you were going to wear this head covering. And if you were a married woman especially, and you went out without the head covering on, that was like grounds for divorce, because you were basically just saying, hey, I'm available while married. And so to not wear your head covering was so shameful, you might as well just have your hair cut off, is the idea that Paul is saying. And there's shame involved with both. So what's the problem? If head coverings were so necessary to a woman's image, why wouldn't they wear them? Like, this would be kind of an obvious thing, right? Now, some people suppose, I thought this was maybe interesting, that women in the church with this mentality of like, You remember how Paul's brought up a few times like all things are lawful? He thought maybe, some people think, maybe they had this idea all things are lawful because of the equality found in the gospel, and so we're going to pray and prophesy with our heads uncovered and our hair down. And both of these things would kind of be signs like, hey, that is only for inside of the home. You don't leave your hair down and have head coverings on outside of the home. And so Paul says, you're dishonoring the men in the area, namely your husband if you're married, by rejecting the head coverings while you're in worship or in the public assembly, wherever they are. Okay, so, but they are worshiping, they're praying and prophesying out. And that's about all I think we can safely reconstruct of like what's going on here with the head coverings and whatnot. So, let's go from there, jump into verse 7, and someone read, there's a lot of writing on the screen, but someone read the printed word from verses 7 through 9.
For a man ought not cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man.
Okay, so now he's going to start, verses 7 through 12, he's going to start an argument from creation, in little words up there. So he's going to change his argument to say that the underlying reason for why they need to wear a head covering is one that kind of, the reason itself, transcends their culture by referring to creation. So verse 7, it helps, as we read verse 7, to keep in mind verse 3. He says in verse 7, for a man ought not to have his head covered, since he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man. Okay, remember verse 3. There's kind of the Christ is the head of man, man is the head of woman, God is the head of Christ. And so we've kind of already got this set up. And so man, well, I guess all of us, we honor our head is the goal here by how we cover or uncover our physical heads. That's the point Paul seems to be making. So Paul says man should leave his head uncovered so that God is glorified or honored. And the reason is because he is the image and the glory of God. It kind of calls us back to Genesis chapter 1, right? Verses 26 and 27, where man is made in God's image. Now, one, I think, important thing for us to know is that Paul isn't trying to interpret Genesis 1 and 2. He's not saying and this is what happened here. He's using parts of it for a purpose, right? And so we need to know what is that purpose. So he uses Genesis 1, 26 to 27 to say that man is made in God's image. He's not leaving women out of that, though, by saying, but women is the glory of man, not man in God's image. That's not what he's saying. And he's actually going to make sure that that's the case a little bit later on. But he has a purpose here. In fact, he's already discussed the mutuality of man and woman in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, right? So he's already set some of the boundaries for us to, as we read this text. But what he does is he combines Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, and he makes for the accounts kind of creation, and he's about to talk about the order of creation. So he says man was made first. In verse 8, man does not originate from woman, but woman from man. Man was not created for the woman's sake, but woman for the man's sake. Man was made first. And so God, in a way, with this the whole image and glory idea here, God, in a way, manifested himself in man by placing certain God-like attributes in his creation. I think it's really cool. We have free will, and we have innate morality, the right and wrong that we all know he has placed in us, and multiple other things. And so man was created to, in a way, manifest God into the world through man's life and his actions. We exist to be like God. So in this way, by making us in God's image, in a way, we possess his glory, or we are his glory. And I heard it described this way, which I thought was cool. It's that similar to how an artist makes a beautiful piece of art. And that work is the artist's glory because it both conveys something about the artist. Looking at a piece of art tells us something about who made it, but it also brings honor to the artist's skill. It's wow, they're also very talented, but also can learn something about you. That's how art works. And so I think that's kind of interesting in how God made man. Now, Paul uses this kind of grammar construction here where he's really trying to cause a contrast here. We don't really get it in our text, but he's saying on the one hand, and then on the other hand, women. On the one hand, men, but on the other hand, this is how women were made. And Paul's trying to stress this point, not that women are made in the image of God, though they are. That's just not his point. but that they are the glory of man. Women exist as this beautiful complement to the existence of man, something that occurred because God recognized this is incomplete. I made Adam, he's great, he's incomplete. And so it is necessary for someone completely different from man to exist and yet be exactly what man needs, exactly what the world needs. And so in this way, the woman is the glory of man. And these are roles that we rejoice in, as both sexes or both genders bring glory to the other in their distinct differences. Now, that's going to call us into into kind of the rest of this section, but in verse 8, he kind of calls in this context from Genesis 2, verses 21 through 23, where he uses Adam to create Eve. And Paul's just recognizing this is the order of creation. But he's not only recognizing the order of creation, but also how the creation of woman came to be, which is by or through man by God. God created, through man made woman. And ultimately, Paul's point is this, is that both man and woman have heads. The head of man is Christ, the head of woman is man. And each has an obligation to bring glory to the one whom they were created, through whom they were created. Kind of the order that we see in Genesis 2. Now they do this by living within their distinctive roles, gender roles, man and woman, because God created both intentionally. And so when a woman removes her head covering in Corinth here, it serves the same purpose as if she were to cut off her hair. She removes her femininity and blends her gender with masculinity. And it's not what God ever intended. All right, let's get in verse 10. Someone read this on the screen for me, please.
Therefore the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head, because of the angels. However, in the Lord, neither is woman independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. For as the woman originates from the man, so also the man has his birth through the woman, and all things originate from God.
Now, Cole, can you explain to us the because of the angel part?
No, absolutely not.
Me either. All right, so verse 10. You said it so kind of, it's like, because of the angels, and then kept going. Anyways, verse 10. All right, so this text is tough. It's actually like one of the harder texts, I think, in the book, because it's like, what are we talking about? And so, for much of this, we kind of have to accept Paul knew, the Corinthians knew, the Dalraidians do not. Okay, so we kind of have to understand that. We're pretty far removed, and we're in an air-conditioned building at Dalraida, and they weren't. And so, we're a little out of the loop for a couple of things, and we're about to see kind of what that means. So, let's start with the part that maybe we can get a little better. Therefore, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head. So, the symbol of authority part. Our text adds a sign or symbol or something like that. And so, if we were to put it literally, it's a little bit more like, therefore, the woman should have authority over her head. It's kind of like a literal way to put that. And so the traditional view, I guess what I've always heard maybe, is that in this passage is that the woman's head covering serves as a symbol or a sign of the man's authority over her. But the language doesn't really lend itself to that. And so it's kind of hard to make that conclusion, especially when the whole like symbol or sign of kind of idea isn't even there. And so we're kind of adding those words because it helps us make sense of it, I guess. So I think maybe a better way to understand this is that Paul might be kind of playing off some ideas that they've already talked about with authority, right? So like in chapter 6, verse 12, let me make sure I get my context right. In chapter 6, verse 12, when he says, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are profitable, all things are lawful for me, but I will not be mastered, which is our word here, authority, over anything. We get another use of this word in chapter 8, verse 9, which is the meat section, where he talks about that we have the liberty to eat. We know that we can eat. We have the freedom to eat whichever. But this time, the woman, it seems, actually does have authority over her head. And those times, Paul's kind of using it to play off of their thoughts. Like, yeah, you think all things are lawful for you. But this time it seems that she actually does have authority over her own physical head. Now, how she uses that freedom, or liberty, or authority, or however you want to translate it, should be to honor or glorify her head, which would be man in this case, by covering herself. So it's basically saying women have the choice. You've got the freedom to choose what you want here. But here's why you should choose to wear the head covering. Now, Paul grounds this as something that's like, yeah, of course, because of the angels. We're in the dark here. One cool option could be like in chapter 6, verse 3, where he talks about that we're going to judge angels. And so he could kind of be saying like, look, if we, kind of putting the whole head coverings idea in the grand scheme of things and being like, look, if we as Christians are one day going to be the ones who judge angels, then how much more insignificant is this whole head covering problem? Like, we should be, like, I don't know, I guess it would put it all into perspective a little bit. There's a couple other options. We don't really know. And so we kind of just have to keep rolling. I think it would be cool that he's using chapter 6, verse 3 as like putting head coverings in light of eternity and saying, yeah, we should be honoring God in this little thing because we're going to be, because of the angels, we're going to be doing something so much greater later. Maybe not. So I drew him like this. All right, verse 11. However, in the Lord, now he's going to get back on track. That was like a little aside. However, in the Lord, neither is woman independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. For as the woman originates from the man, so also the man has his birth through the woman, and all things originate from God. So Paul gets back on the argument here, and he's going to make sure that what we just read in verses 9 and 10 cannot be taken in any kind of like inferior or controlling way. He says woman is not independent of man because she exists through man, right? Her origin, so to say, Adam, through Adam's rib. And so because of that, because she exists through man, then her freedom, right, to choose if she's going to wear a head covering or not, her freedom or authority is qualified by man, meaning you got to keep him in mind. Each gender is made by God. And so Paul makes sure that we can't read this text in such a way that presents women as inferior to man because both are made in the image of God. You both originate from God. And so Paul teaches that two things. One, the main things here. One, women have the freedom to cover their heads or not, but that honoring the distinctiveness of their gender by wearing a head covering honors man and man's creator. And then the second thing is, regardless of the context or the age within which we live, the roles of man and woman always have to be maintained. Okay, now let's get into verses 13 through 16. We're going to see an argument from what is proper. So I'm going to read verses 13 through 16. Please.
Judge among yourselves, it is proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered. Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. But if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom, nor do the churches of God.
Okay. So, verse 13, Paul expects the audience to agree with him. And so, he says, what? You judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? And this is a rhetorical question. The obvious answer is, no, that's not proper. Okay, so now this is an argument from what is proper. He wants them to agree with him. So in verse 14, does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? Now I think, I've always understood this as nature is in like, from the very beginning, it's almost like God put in us, hey man, you need to have short hair. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think it's probably more so that this is like, you know how we may look at something and say like, all right, that's unnatural. Well, it's because it's unnatural for us. It's like, sometimes it's like, okay, that's weird. And we all know it's weird, but it's because how we're conditioned, right? It's where we live. I think that's kind of what we're getting at in Corinth here. Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man's long hair is a dishonor to him? And so I think it's almost like, hey, don't y'all notice, like, that would be unnatural. Now, Jason Momoa. Is Jason Momoa a feminine guy? No. Does he have long hair? Yes. Right? And so it's a different culture, right? Thor, when he had long hair. Did Thor look like a woman? No. Very much not. Okay, and so it's not that it's just men with long hair. This is the only two I can think of. They're like, all right, there's no way someone can argue with these two. Just because a man has long hair doesn't mean it's like, oh, you broke your gender role. It's not what we're talking about. Okay, but he is pointing at, hey, we would know, looking at this context, and even Now it's becoming a little bit more normal, but even back in the day in America, this would still be the case, right? Because that would be a cultural thing. And so he's looking at this culture thing, and he's saying, hey, even to nature itself, that if you have long hair, you'd be considered feminine. That's disgraceful for men. Okay, verse 15. So he says, but if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her. But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her? ? For her hair is given her for a covering. Okay, so what is dishonorable or disgraceful for man brings glory to woman. Her femininity, her long hair. Long hair just distinguishes man from the beauty of woman. And so in saying that her hair is given to her as a covering, Paul is essentially saying that women should, I think here, women should follow the way of nature, as it is just natural for the head of a woman to be covered. I don't think that her hair is her head covering. I'd heard that before, and I thought, oh, dude, that breaks the code here. But then this whole point, this whole section would kind of be irrelevant, because he's been talking about head coverings this whole time, and that you should wear them in Corinth. And so that would kind of destroy the whole point by being like, well, if you got long hair, kind of just cover, you're covered. So I don't think it's the hair itself, right? But he says that their long hair is natural for women to have long hair, is what he says. And so it seems he's just kind of saying, follow the way of nature. Women are to already cover their head. Look at their hair. It's meant to cover your head. Now verse 16. Paul seems to expect that some people are going to be contentious, like you just want to win an argument. And so about what he's just written. And so to combat that, he says, look, this custom or practice, depending on your translation, is what is being done in all the churches of God. There is no other practice than what I have just described. Everybody adheres to the customs that honor their gender roles as God designed for it to be. Okay, there's the text. Now, head coverings. Yes or no? So if you think, yeah, hey, we should be wearing head covering, women should be wearing head coverings, then what's your reason? And if not, then what's your reason? Any thoughts? Okay, so nobody knows, and half of us gonna do the head covering thing, half of us not. What's gonna? All right, so let's say no. Let's just feel like we'd all agree here. No, they're not necessary. Now, if we're gonna say no, then why? What in the text is gonna point us to saying, this is how we know this isn't necessarily a thing for us today? All right, here we go. Yes, Cooper. I got it. All right, Cooper. This better be a good answer. Honestly, any answer is a good answer right now. You're in a good spot.
Well, Paul says in the beginning of the chapter that both genders and both roles will be praying and prophesying in the public assembly, and we obviously don't do that today, so we can't really apply the same rules that he outlines here, at least in the same way that they would have applied at that time.
Okay. I'm going to be nice to you because your family's here. And so otherwise I'd be like, all right, but what if? But that's true. Okay, so one thing, and we're actually going to have to get to that in just a second, is that we see that it seems both men and women are praying or prophesying in whatever context it is that we're looking at. We're going to have to reconcile that, and we will kind of here in a second with our 5 minutes. Okay, what else? Anything else?
You're gonna hit me for this. This prophesying is miraculous prophecy, I assume?
It sure seems so. Yes, Tom.
Is it sort of, again, with the idea of being in the public, similar to if I'm, if eating meat is gonna make my brother stumble, then if not wearing a head covering is such a contentious cultural thing that it's this isn't the hill to die on, in terms of stopping people from coming into the church.
So in a way, yeah, I see what you're saying. Is that the reason that you would wear a head covering is not for yourself. It's so that it's because you want people to see you in a certain light, but it's kind of dependent on everybody else in a way. Now, obviously, it's just very different or removed from. We are very removed from it, and so for them, it would seem much more necessary than just like Paul doesn't start this and say, "Look, I know y'all don't have to wear head coverings to be worthy of respect. I know that." He doesn't really start it like he does with the meat section, right? And so there's a little bit of differences, but overall, I kind of see where you're getting at. Is that the perception of others is what we're kind of what is most important here. Okay, let's find a couple of things. Let's look in the text. Thing number one that we can look at is we got lots of cultural language. If you know anything about Rome, you get things about shame and honor and what is proper and what is natural. And all of these are kind of words that are heavily cultural words. That would be hard for us to spot, but it's there. There's lots of those words. Two is that we're heavily appealing to what is known to them already, both by the church and the world around them. Length of hair, shaved heads, the function of head coverings, that kind of stuff. All stuff that everybody in the world would kind of, in their world, would know. Three, and I think this is maybe the easiest one for us, is in verse 16, he calls it a custom or a practice, but not like a law or a command. Okay, so this is, he says, we have no such custom. It's custom. Okay, so there's a few other things that we can look at as well, but overall we're seeing that while the underlying principle, maybe what we can take from this, is that then this is what it looks like to fulfill the expectations of your gender role, and we need to follow that. That doesn't mean that today our expectations for a gender role is that we wear a head covering or that women wear a head covering. Nobody sees women's heads this way or views the world that way in America. Okay, and so that's not what is involved in fulfilling our gender roles. For them, it was. It was a really, really, really big deal. So you weren't. And there's a few probably different ways that we could talk about that, but that's kind of three easy ones I found with the language appealing to what's already known by everybody, and also he calls it a custom. Yes?
So I think I agree with you on that, and I would say that it is obviously a custom, and I would say that there are some parts of America that still sort of observe that custom, even within the Church of Christ. Like there's some really deep Appalachian South churches you can go to where women still wear head coverings.
Right.
And if you were to attend those services as a woman, it would be almost disrespectful to those churches to not wear a head covering, I would say. And so sort of in the same vein as Tommy, like if you were to go into those churches and everything they follow is doctrinally sound, but that's the one thing that you may disagree with them on, you should still, in my opinion at least, you should still observe that custom of theirs to be respectful to them, as opposed to combating that and saying that, well, the rest of America doesn't do that. Well, sure. If that's what their church does, I mean, to me, that would seem appropriate.
Well, one thing to consider is that this is based on how the entire world saw, like their entire world saw women this way. So that is something that is going to be a difference in one body of people misinterpreting a text, and so adhering to that misinterpretation versus our entire world and culture seeing women like this, and so we are going to follow what our entire culture already knows. And so that would be a difference that you'd have to consider in that situation, but I see what you're getting at. We don't have time to talk about that one thing that I wanted to bring up, and so that is such a bummer. Okay, next week. All right, next week we'll bring it up, and then we'll jump into the next stuff. So next week we'll get back into chapter 11. Go ahead. Yeah.
Is next week spring break?
Is next week spring break?
Yeah.
Did you make the next?
Maybe I'll post some notes online or something. I don't know what I'll do. Yeah, maybe I'll send something in the group. We'll see. Maybe I'll just send my whole notes. Tonight at our house is float night, and so we're gonna get some different flavored ice cream that are soda flavored, and we're gonna get the sodas to go with it and make floats. And then who knows? Maybe we'll get crazy and do a Kahoot or something. So, anyways, y'all good to go. Oh, maybe we'll do breakfast tonight.
I really thought, this like
talked about with like other construction and that anyway, like